Okay, so good afternoon. I think we're live. I'll pull up on Facebook just to make sure. Okay, so good afternoon. This is Steve Mazzacane of the Steve Mazzacane podcast. We are just trying to edit one thing before we get going here. Nothing earth-shattering in the podcast today. If you miss it, it's not the end of the world. Basically talking some headlines, talking Fauci and his testimony today before Congress. But before we get too far into it, the market is down 525 today. Just a brutal 4 or 5 days since the Fed talked, I think, Wednesday. It has just been down, down, down. There is too much uncertainty in the markets, too much uncertainty politically, too much uncertainty in the world that right now everybody's selling off. Even tech. Tesla had a rough day today after a bad conference call on their battery. So from a market standpoint, people who know and watch this on a regular basis, I, on occasion, buy and sell stock. I did ads today. People ask all the time, what did I buy? I did add to CVS. I think CVS is a long-term buy. I'm going to hold that for hopefully a year or longer. But it's an amazing day, amazing week in the market. You still can't avoid investing, but pretty rough week overall. So in any event, I'm glad to be here. I got an email last night from someone who just said, I don't care what you talk about. We're just used to you coming on at 4 o'clock. So I don't want that to be an excuse not to always be prepared, but there's not a lot of unbelievably newsworthy events going on right now. So we'll talk about we'll talk about Fauci, Corona. The other news that came across today, and this is before my time. I'm 42 years old, so this person was in the Hall of Fame in the 70s. But Gale Sayers died, and the Chicago Bears running back was the youngest player ever inducted into the Hall of Fame. The only reason that plays a role for me is I just remember the movie Brian's Song. It was one of the saddest movies I think I've ever seen. I was a young kid when I saw it. I remember thinking, I don't ever want to see a sad movie again. And then I watched Old Yeller, and it was just bad. So one of the saddest movies I've ever seen, and my first experience with really football as a young person. So that was sad to see. Okay. Overall, what jumped out at me today, and I won't talk too much business, was Fauci's testimony. And lost in this, Supreme Court stuff and election stuff coming up and all these other issues is the fact that we're still in a pandemic. And we are, a lot of families are struggling. A lot of businesses I talk to here in Brantford on the shoreline are struggling. I see a lot of people with a hard time paying bills. There are people that I know hard time paying rent. That $300 helped a little bit, but now you're getting into a month or two since that extra $600 is worn out. And so many jobs that needed to be filled have been filled. People are looking for jobs. It's going to get bad. And there doesn't seem to be any will whatsoever in Congress to pass anything. I see Republicans complaining that Democrats wouldn't pass that small bill they proposed. That's just political nonsense. It was a nonsense bill. Didn't really do much, and it wasn't anywhere close to what actually needs to happen. And we now have more evidence of this. So, Trump has been saying we're going to have a vaccine by April, hoping to have it. So there's two different things we have to talk about here. There's when the vaccine is available, and then 2, when it's approved, then 3, when there's enough of the vaccine that everybody can get it. So there's 3 different aspects that have to be. So these dates that we're talking about, you could accuse Trump of lying or whatever, but it really depends on what date we're talking about. Johnson & Johnson just went into their phase 3 trials, which is really, really big. The reason it's big is there are other companies that are in trials now too, but to store their vaccine, it takes equipment people don't have. It used to be to such a cold temperature. Johnson & Johnson's is at a normal refrigerated temperature, so it has a much better chance of being successful. So Fauci today, and I'm going to get my news from CNBC and read from there. Do this 1 second. Fauci also went after Rand Paul. It was pretty incredible to see. Okay. White House coronavirus advisor Anthony Fauci told Congress on Wednesday it might take some time for inoculations for COVID-19 to become available because of the rigorous clinical testing required. And the FDA is making it clear they're going to put these through all of those rigorous. What they don't want to have happen is somebody politically push a vaccine without the medical clearances. So the FDA has made clear they're going to be very rigorous in approving this. But, and it's kind of supported some of Trump's statements, there is growing optimism that scientists will find one or more safe and effective vaccines by the end of the year, early 2021, and that U.S. can have enough vaccine doses by April. This is Fauci speaking. In November, you'll probably be maybe 50 million doses available. By December, maybe another 100 plus million. Then you get to January and February. By the time you get to April, it'll be 700 million. It'll be rolling in as the months go by, and by the time you get to maybe the third or fourth month of 2021, you'll have doses for everyone. But that means we have a long way to go. Remember, April is 7 months away. And so we have a ridiculous, I don't know. I mean, I work with small businesses every single day. And I have emails from people who are struggling every single day. I know some of our social services here in town, what they're going through and the requests that are coming in. This is not a joke. I know there are people out there saying, you know what, people were paid too much money. It's true. A lot of people did make more money with the stimulus package than they would have made otherwise. But the fact of the matter is there are people who are in desperate need of help. And having mass people kicked out of their apartments, kicked out of their homes, and not working is a bad thing. And so, Trump came out and said, make it big. The Supreme Court issue is going to cover that up, so likely nothing is going to happen. For the life of me, and I've maintained this from day one, I don't know what the Senate Republicans were doing. Nothing that they were doing makes sense. From a political standpoint, I thought maybe at first they were trying to put off passing it. Maybe if they passed it, a few weeks before the election, that would be in people's minds. Maybe that would get them votes. I don't know. But to have the Republicans come up with their bill, the Democrats come up with their bill months ago now. The Republicans in Senate did nothing for forever. Announced they were coming up with one, delayed that, then put up one that was a fraction. Now, there were some things I agreed with, for example, legal protection for businesses, but a fraction of what the Democrats were. Then they couldn't agree, and the problem was even that proposal, the Republicans in the Senate were not all behind. So McConnell needed Democrats to get on board, but showed no ability or desire to work with Democrats on a bill that came anywhere close to what they wanted to spend. Pelosi, from what I've seen, would come down to $2.2 trillion, but Republicans want no part of that. I don't get it. I don't understand this politically. It doesn't make any sense to me. If I was running the Republican Party, I'd be throwing about as much money as I possibly could, because here's the reality. Is in the comment here, they should pass what they both agree on? No, neither one wants to agree. For some reason, the Republican view is it's a bad thing to pass. Many Republicans in the Senate don't want to pass anything. The fact is every single economic advisor on both sides, the Fed chair said this, has called for more stimulus. Trump has called for higher stimulus. The Democrats have called for higher stimulus. Not as a giveaway. You have bipartisan support for a stimulus. And you don't have the support of Republicans in the Senate. And so nothing's happening. And so let's take out for a second the need of an actual stimulus. Right? Let's pretend it's not needed, or we'll take all that out of the equation. Let's look at just the politics of it. Now, if you look at every single poll, and I take all polls with a huge grain of salt, I understand that. I think polls drastically underestimate Trump's support. What happens is a lot of the people that do support Trump may not always be easily reachable. They may not always be represented as well in some of these polls. So I think you can probably put 1 or 2 points the other way. But even adjusting for that, Biden has a significant lead. And the Senate, it'll be tough, but the Senate is in play. If Biden crushes Trump, the Senate may go to the Democrats. And if you were one of those people that was hoping for that $600, hoping for that $1,200 single payout, that desperately needs it, you're voting for Democrats. You're voting for Biden, and you're voting for whatever Democrat's running in the Senate, because the current Senate, run by Republicans, isn't giving you anything. And my guess is one of the first things passed, if Biden gets in and the Democrats take the Senate, is a significant bill to help those people. Knowing that, what is the political advantage of the Republicans right now? What are they thinking? You have a bill that actually puts money in people's hands at a time where even Trump is saying you're going to have it by April. So that's 6-7 months away. What is the thinking of any political strategist who's running any Senate campaign for the Republicans? Nothing here makes any sense. Not only does it seem like you have no idea what's happening on Main Street, no idea what's happening in the real world, how people are genuinely struggling. And I tell you, one of the things we can look at are, what is the business drop-off? For a long time, a lot of small businesses were propped up because you had people with cash in their pocket. We've talked about this on this podcast before. People who make a small amount of money, the people on the lower income brackets, spend the money they get. So we can say, wow, we're giving them $600 and they're making more on unemployment than they were making before. But those people are often the best natural stimulus for an economy, because those people spend. The people who have a couple $100,000 and they could weather the storm, they're saving. They're not spending a bunch of money. But you put $600 in people's hands who do not have $600, they're going to spend that money. So that has absolutely been a huge, on top of the Fed, and we've talked about the Fed in the past, on top of that, but it's been a huge part of propping up especially small businesses, restaurants, small grocery stores, things of that nature. You have people with some money, they can pay their bills, they may have extra money, they spend that locally, and that helps those small businesses. This is just how math works, it's how economics works, it's how small businesses work. That is now run out. So Trump passed a temporary bill, $300 per person. That has now run out. If you're a Republican in the Senate, and Nancy has said, all right, we want a $3 trillion bill, they'll come down to $2.2 trillion. Trump has said, pass a big bill. How is every Republican in that Senate saying, not only are we going to pass a $4 trillion bill, but we're going to do it now, and we're going to put our name on this thing in an election year? You have people dying for money. You have bipartisan, the Democrats saying, let's give money. And you are now willingly playing the role of bad guy, when the president is saying, and Fauci is before Congress saying, you're not going to have full vaccines, even if we get something approved in the next month or two. You're not going to have enough doses for everybody until April. It doesn't make any sense. And that's what's amazing to me from a political standpoint. Never mind the humanitarian standpoint. Never mind that people are struggling. And he extended that you can't kick people out, but now people are going to have 5, 6, 7 months of rent to pay that are never going to be able to pay that once that expires. And so how long is he going to continue, either him or the next president, continue to let that go? People are just racking up debt and no real way to pay that off. So for the life of me, I cannot figure out what is actually happening. But if you watched it today, you got a very interesting back and forth between Dr. Anthony Fauci and Rand Paul. And this is where politics comes into play, and we kind of ignore the science. I am someone who believes what Dr. Fauci says. I think he has actively tried to avoid politics. But in the current situation, it's hard to do that. Every single line you say is going to be construed as for or against something, and whatever side is going to take you out of context, they're going to do it. I think science changes, the nature of science changes. It's not always the same. And as this pandemic went on, the science changed. The advice that came from scientists early on may be different than it is now. And so that has certainly been the case. But if we look at this interaction, is Rand Paul tried to claim that New York overcame the coronavirus because it achieved herd immunity. And it's an amazing interaction that went on between these, because Fauci basically said, you're not listening and you're wrong. And Rand Paul is an interesting guy because he's kind of an outlier in the Republican Party, the libertarian aspect of it. In many ways, he's a Republican that's like legalize all drugs. I kind of like that. The idea of staying out of foreign policy may be dangerous, but whatever. So he's a unique voice in many things. But Rand Paul says this: to those who argue that the lockdown flattened the curve in New York and New Jersey, the evidence argues otherwise, accusing Fauci of being a big fan of Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo when New York shut down despite its high number of COVID-19 deaths. Fauci came back, no, you misconstrued that, Senator, and you've done that repeatedly in the past. He responded. They got hit very badly. They made some mistakes. Right now, if you look at what's going on, the things that are going on in New York to get their test positivity to 1% or less is because they are looking at the guidelines that we put together from the task force for 4 or 5 things like masks, social distancing, outdoors more than indoors, avoiding crowds, and washing hands. So Fauci was on The Daily Show the other day. In my opinion, a very reasonable, logical guy. I don't see what the issues are. I mean, people politically want to go after him. I just don't see it. That being said, this interaction in New York was true. Early on, it was bad. But New York shut down. If you've been to New York City at any point in the last 6 months, many areas of it are ghost town. There's like nothing going on in New York City. So I don't know how herd immunity happens when you've got nothing going on. And the numbers certainly do not support what Rand Paul is saying. But this tells you, if you're a Republican or a Democrat, the desperate need to make this as political as possible a month and a half before the election. And the only question I have left, and it's a personal question, is November 4th. Do we stop asking these questions? Do we stop being ridiculous? Science is science. Doctors, there are doctors on both sides, but overall, people who become doctors have a passion for science. Science is about gathering evidence, making a hypothesis, and constantly challenging that hypothesis. What it's not about is throwing out words that have, we have herd immunity. No, we don't. You can't possibly have herd immunity. It's just not possible. But in Congress, the people who lead our nation are throwing out these things that make no sense. And I feel bad for Dr. Fauci. But all of this goes back to the same discussion that I have in questioning other Republicans in the Senate. What are you gaining by either thinking this is over or not wanting to pass some sort of stimulus bill? What are you gaining politically? I don't see it. Does anybody have an answer on what the Republicans gain politically? What demographic are they attracting by saying, I don't want to pass a stimulus bill? I don't see a whole lot of people arguing against the stimulus bill. I don't see rallies against the stimulus bill. I don't see anything that I see Trump saying do a larger one, and I get it. I get him saying do a larger one politically. It would help him. It would also help the senators. But nothing here seems to make any sense. Usually when we look at politicians, we can see what they're trying to get at. We're seeing where they're going after this demographic. Or, Trump's appointee for the Supreme Court will be to either go after women or go after a Hispanic woman from Florida or wherever the person comes from. There's going to be political narratives. His call for a larger stimulus, we get that political narrative. We get him calling for law and order because he's trying to go against the rallies and go against the Democratic base. We get all of those things. What are the senators, Republican senators in the Senate, actually doing? That's where I'm lost. So that's my kind of rant for today. And it's not the first time I've made that rant because it just doesn't make any sense. But we'll leave it at that. To go completely off of politics, and this just shows some of the industries that are going to be destroyed. Most of the major movie studios put off their movie releases today. And that's because we saw the disaster that Tenet was. One of the big blockbuster movies that came out just a few weeks ago and tried to see what kind of audiences they would get. And this would be a movie that would open to $150 million and it got crushed, was Tenet. And so all these major studios are putting that off. When that happens, not only do the movie theaters not make money and all their employees, and all the people who work there, obviously Brantford, we have that. North Haven, there's many movie theaters. But movies don't get made. They're not filming things. So that industry is going to get crushed. It's an industry we may not have. If these restaurants have to go through winter and don't have full seating inside or seating at the bars, they're going to get crushed. There are a million service industries that are going to get crushed. And in many of these businesses, once they close, they're not reopening. If you're a restaurant right now in debt, you're not reopening, which means a lot of that PPP money isn't getting back. That's basically $1,000. But you are going to have huge numbers of people that are out of work, that are looking, and there aren't going to be jobs to fill. The industries will not be the same again. And the other risk you run, I see this with me. So for about the last 6 months, there has not been sports. The other night I was watching basketball on TV. It just doesn't feel the same. It's just not the same experience watching it. And so I'm saying to myself, during the shutdown, I got to the gym like crazy. You know, my brother of mine owns a gym, so I got to work out alone. But I worked out more, I walked more, I read more because there was no sports. Why do I go back to that? Businesses that had offices in New York City that have now gotten used to using Zoom and having video conference calls, are they in a hurry to go back to that? Countless industries that had expectation of a certain revenue number just aren't going to have it anymore. The world is simply not going to be the same. And the impacts we haven't seen yet. There's unemployed, some are back, some restaurants are picking up, some are making adjustments. We have tents and heaters and all that stuff outside, but some of these places are not going to make it through the winter. Now, the ones who survive can end up doing phenomenally next year, right? If we lose 20% of our restaurants, 30% of our restaurants, 20% of our businesses, they could do phenomenally. Office space may drop in rent, and maybe in a year or two, when all this is done, people can start new businesses and rent office space. But there are going to be massive, massive changes, and the life we lived before will not be the same afterwards. And the full economic impacts we haven't seen yet, which is even more of a reason to wonder what the hell the Republicans in the Senate are thinking. If there was ever a time to pass a stimulus package, a big one, it's a month before Election Day. Because if you don't, you're basically telling everybody, vote for the Democrats because they want to pass it. And they will. If the Democrats have the Senate, the House, and the presidency, I would imagine within the first 2 to 3 weeks, you get a very large stimulus package. And I don't know how to tell anybody who isn't relying on that real money every week, or those businesses who don't need more PPP dollars, that they shouldn't vote in their best interest. And the Republicans bought this on themselves. It doesn't make any sense. So, all right, so that's today. It is Wednesday, so we'll be back tomorrow. Again, if there's questions or issues or things you want us to discuss, we'll do it. Tomorrow we will talk about the verdict or the not the verdict, I'm sorry, but the case with the Brianna case in a little more detail. I didn't have time to go through it so I could speak to it with any authority today. I don't want to talk about things I didn't research yet. So we'll talk about that tomorrow and some of the racial impacts and we'll have some more time passes, so we'll see what some of the impacts down in that city are. And we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Thanks for joining. I appreciate it. If there's questions, comments, please leave them. You can always send me a private email if there's something you'd like to say, or text me or what have you. Thanks for joining. I will see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Good night, guys.